Alright, so this one is probably seeming like a really strange video for me to do because I don't talk about this much on the channel. But I don't know if you guys realize this, but I am a huge fan of Power Rangers. I forgot that was turned on. Okay, let's just set it down very, very carefully. There we go. Yeah, so I have talked about Power Rangers on the channel a little bit here and there in the past. Did a review of the 2017 movie, which I still swear up and down is a good movie. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. And I did put the original Green Ranger's background theme behind my short review of Godzilla vs. Kong, which definitely wasn't hinting at a stealth character that they introduced late in the movie. Wink. And this is in spite of the fact that I've remained a fan of Power Rangers since I was a child. I like at least something about literally every single season. Even Operation Overdrive has some interesting ideas in it. You will not know at all what I am talking about unless you're already a Power Rangers fan. But that's this video in a nutshell, and I apologize. I really am going to try to keep it to a minimum, I promise. And yet, in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that I think a lot of the more modern seasons have been good to great, frankly. Like, I am a massive fan of Power Rangers Dino Charge, one of the more semi-recent seasons. I don't know if you guys can see them, but like I have all but like 2 of the Zords from Power Rangers Dino Charge on the shelf over here, including like toy line exclusive Zords and recolors. Like I'm missing I think 2 recolors, and that's it. That's how much I like that series. And yet I haven't felt the need to talk about any of the Power Rangers TV shows on this channel before, until this one. The current running Power Rangers show, Power Rangers Dino Fury. Yes, I know I said Dino Fury, and I just mentioned Dino Charge earlier. There's also Dino Thunder. Are there any more with Dino in the name? There's more with dinos in them. I think that's all the ones with dinos in their names. Yeah, Power Rangers deals with dinosaurs a lot. Japan likes dinosaurs, and Power Rangers is technically the adaptation of a Japanese tokusatsu show called Super Sentai. And even though the series previous to this one, Beast Morphers, was, I think, a genuinely solid show that delved way deeper into the Power Rangers lore, such as it is, than it really needed to be successful, giving us a crossover which, while it could have been better, made the show feel like it existed in a larger community of Power Rangers teams, and gave us the very first time that we have ever seen more than one team's Megazords on screen at the same time, since the team-up between Power Rangers in Space and Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, and also ended off the series by wrapping up the arc for a fan-favorite villain from a completely different Power Rangers show. It was really good, and I never felt the need to talk about it. But Power Rangers Dino Fury, the second show from Hasbro, the first being Beast Morphers, and yes, that is the same Hasbro that makes Transformers, by the way. Dino Fury is a completely different story. We're 5 episodes in, 6 episodes by the time this video goes up, since it airs on Saturday mornings. And every single episode I've seen so far has left me more and more impressed than the last. And this isn't just impressed in terms of like a Power Rangers fan. I'm impressed with this show in terms of a kids' TV show as well. And I'm not going to go into too terribly much detail as to why, like my reasons for why, my specific personal ones. Because my specific personal reasons for why I think this show is a really good Power Rangers show mostly draw comparisons between it and past Power Rangers shows. And I don't know how big of an audience I have of Power Rangers fans on this channel, frankly. Like, I wouldn't say that any Power Rangers show doesn't think itself through, doesn't try to explain its plot points. Like literally, the last Power Rangers show that I might agree with you doesn't do those things is like the first half of the very first season. But man, this show really goes out of its way to try to create a realistic world for these characters to live in. And yet, I can't really explain to you why that's kind of remarkable unless you have some prior knowledge of how Power Rangers usually works. So I'm just going to talk about kind of more generic things here to try to sell you on at least giving the show a try if you're someone who likes kids media. Real quick though, let's go over the typical format of a Power Rangers show. It is a monster of the week kind of show, just inherently, because that's what the source material is too. But Power Rangers in particular tends to go beyond just adapting the source material. I say it's technically an adaptation of Super Sentai because it technically is. A lot of Power Rangers seasons take plot points from Super Sentai and repurposed them for plot points in their Power Rangers show, but Power Rangers is a very different beast. The intention for Power Rangers was always to create a kids' action show that looked bigger budget than it actually was by taking stock footage of the action sequences of characters in suits and or giant robots from the Japanese show and plugging them into American-only story episodes. The specific Super Sentai that Dino Fury is adapting is called Ryu Soldier. If you want to check it out, I'm sure you can find it somewhere online. I might even have a link to where you can. Wink, wink. And while it wasn't really my thing, it is still technically a solid show. But this is going to be a very different beast, telling almost a completely different story, because at this point, Super Sentai has an interconnected lore, and Power Rangers has an interconnected lore, like interconnected between seasons, but they're completely different. Like, almost wholesale 100% completely different. Like, I'm not super into the Sentai, but I think, for example, Super Sentai, all the different teams exist, for the most part anyway, in like different universes throughout a multiverse, whereas for the most part, with like two exceptions, all of the Power Rangers seasons do technically take place in the same reality. So just right there, inherently, the story structure going from one season to the next is going to be different. Even though now, typically, from series to series, they completely change teams and powers. That wasn't always the case, and these characters do still all technically inhabit the same Earth, for the most part. And while Power Rangers doesn't go out of its way to define its lore, there's a lot here, especially considering that the people who work on Power Rangers nowadays tend to be the kinds of people who watched it when they were younger. Like, not all of them, right? Because there's still some people who are a little too old for that working on the show, but there's a lot of people who are, and you can tell, because they slip Easter eggs into the backgrounds of episodes all over the place nowadays. It's nuts. And one of the most fun things about Power Rangers, one of the reasons I'm still a fan as an adult, and one of the reasons I tend to rewatch Linkara's history of Power Rangers very often as I'm doing editing, because he does the same thing, is I like to try to figure out how the lore works. Because there's a lot of contradictory stuff here too, or at least stuff that seems contradictory, and it's a lot of fun to go back through the ridiculous continuity of this show and try to find things that explain it away. Like, straight up, Power Rangers is probably the only franchise that I go out of my way to create headcanons about, aside from Steven Universe. Like, I have headcanons about other shows, but this is the only one, aside from something like Steven Universe, that I go out of my way to form headcanons about. Like, for example, time travel in Power Rangers is always very, very weird. It works differently every single time it happens. Every single time. No exception. And 9 times out of 10, if a time travel is forced onto the heroes, or history is changed around the heroes, they are, for the most part, unaffected by it. Like sometimes they'll get younger, but their minds will stay the same, for example. And so I've always headcanoned that the universal morphing grid, the thing that all Power Rangers are connected to, that gives them the energy that they need to morph into their Power Ranger forms, protects them and even manipulates reality to bend around them, so that if their exploits are erased from the timeline, the effects of them are still preserved. Like the greater, grander effect that they had on the world is preserved. And 9 times out of 10, if there is a blatant continuity contradiction going from one series to another, I'll just shrug it off by saying, somebody connected to the morphing grid must have time traveled again and made a butterfly effect. Like, it's nothing that I take seriously or anything, but it's a lot of fun. If you're somebody who likes that kind of thing, I genuinely think you'd enjoy getting into this franchise for that specific reason, if nothing else. But it's also just a pretty fun show to watch. Even if you just fast forward through everything that isn't an action sequence, the action sequences in Power Rangers are really good. There are exceptions, of course, but even the fight sequences that they film for the American show, I was going to say in America, but they film in New Zealand, but the ones that they film for the American show to combine with the Japanese footage tend to be really solid. And who the heck doesn't like giant robots fighting giant monsters, right? I mentioned earlier in this review a massive blockbuster film that is currently in theaters It is about exactly that. Oh, no, wait, that wasn't about a giant robot fighting a giant monster. It was about a giant monkey fighting a giant monster. Or was it? Wink. And while Power Rangers started out as a goofy message show with very few interconnected story arcs, man, when they do a story arc, they do it well. And that hasn't been a thing as much recently either. Beast Morphers had some really great story arcs, and so far the continuity between episodes in Dino Fury has been really freaking good. Like the villain of the show, a character named Void Knight, I have no idea what he's up to. He's trying to collect the spores which grow into this season's various costumed monsters for something, to use the energy that they produce for something. But I have no idea what that something is. And it's very intriguing because this guy does not have the presence of the regular big bad of a Power Rangers season. He feels like a guy who's just trying to do a thing kind of desperately and doesn't entirely know what he's doing yet. He's kind of feeling things out, fumbling his way towards his goal. And that's not the regular kind of Power Rangers main villain. It's super cool and makes him way more interesting than he would be otherwise, because he's not the first purple-colored Power Rangers-esque evil knight character that we've seen pop up in one of these seasons before, and characters who look the same from one Power Rangers show to the next tend to be pretty similar archetypical kinds of characters. This guy feels like something completely different, and it's very refreshing. Not only that, but this team of Power Rangers, I don't know how to put it exactly. They feel like they exist within a living, breathing world. Like things happen to them off screen. Like there's a continuity to their lives. Which I know doesn't sound like anything too special, but in a show which, like Power Rangers, tends to be, even if there are story arcs going on, still an episodic show, good for syndication, that's interesting. Like, we've seen these Power Rangers practice using their morphers so they can morph faster on the fly. That's not something we typically see. And the Power Rangers aren't the only well-realized characters in this show either. There are background characters that are, like, legitimately compelling on their own. Like, a couple of the Power Rangers on this team work for a BuzzFeed-esque news network. And their boss, trying to remember her name and I can't, which sucks, I actually like the character, is a recurring character who has an impact on the plots of these episodes, but also serves as comic relief, and she's pretty funny. But not only that, but the news network itself actually interacts with the Power Rangers. They've done interviews for them that have gotten the word of these monster attacks out to people, and via this news network and help from this news network, they've managed to create an early warning system where people, when they see one of these spores about to turn into a monster, can call in and the Power Rangers can get there before too much damage happens. The Power Rangers in this series, while they still keep their identities a secret for some reason, like they've given reasons, but I still think they could tell people their identities. I think it'd be fine. They interact with the populace and are open with the populace about the nature of this threat and how to best combat it. That is not something you see in Power Rangers, ever. Unless it's a team of Power Rangers who work for like a government program or something. It's a smartly written show. Like, it is at the end of the day a message show, which is kind of a tired archetype, but even there it excels. The messages in this show are nuanced. They're understated. They're not shoved in your face. They're just the kind of thing that kids will pick up on via osmosis as they watch the show unfold in front of them. And the stuff around those messages is really smart. It's really smartly written television. I look forward to seeing what happens next. Each episode, not just because I like to see monsters fight robots, but because I actually want to see what's up with these characters. The acting is solid and the characters are all pretty distinct, and they're not like cookie cutter archetypes this time. They all have distinct, developed personalities. Even some of them kind of don't even like each other sometimes, which is really rare in a Power Rangers show. Like, there is some, admittedly not too severe. It's not like they hate each other or anything, but there's some antagonism between these characters sometimes. Not to mention that their Red Ranger is this extremely long-lived alien knight, and the actor who plays him brings a real presence to the role that suggests the weight of his history, that suggests that he has some real history to him, which we've gotten into a little bit but haven't really delved into too much, and I really hope we do more. He seems very interesting. But he kind of feels like he's a little bit removed from the rest of the group. He mentors them, he trains them. He doesn't really feel like he meshes completely with them, which is also a really interesting dynamic for Power Rangers. And yet every single one of the Rangers is still a good person. They're still the kind of person who will go out of their way to do good for other people, even at the risk of themselves. They are distinct, different people, but they're all good guys, too. Genuinely. The show looks good. The Super Sentai footage is integrated really well into it, and the new footage that they filmed specifically for the American show looks great. It integrates really well with the Super Sentai stuff. Like, there have been a couple of times where I can pick out one or the other, but it's rare, and mostly because they actually gender swapped their Ryusoulger Green Ranger, made him into a girl character here, which is pretty cool. I like having more girls on the team than less, and also it's kind of Power Rangers tradition. This isn't the first time Power Rangers has done this, but like there's a difference in body type going from a male stunt actor in a suit to a female stunt actor in a suit, if that makes sense. It makes it easier to pick out which footage is from which show. But that actually brings me to my one complaint about the show, and even that's not really a complaint. Like, I'm framing it as one, but I'm framing it as one the same way that in a job interview you might frame dedicating too much time to the task as a negative, right? Like straight up, this show, kind of like the original show, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Green Ranger in this show risks becoming the only character I care about out of the entire cast. Like in the original show, it was Tommy Oliver, played by Jason David Frank. Like, he's the kind of character that even if you don't know anything about Power Rangers, you know who he is. He showed up, he was the only character in that show who really had a character arc, and so they just kind of kept writing him character arcs, and didn't really write character arcs for anyone else. And then he kept coming back to the show. He came back as the Black Ranger in Dino Thunder. He's come back for multiple cameos. Like I mentioned Linkara earlier, I'm going to steal one of his jokes here. Once Tommy showed up, it became the Tommy Oliver show featuring the Power Rangers. And it hasn't been as bad with this show's Green Ranger, a girl named Izzy. But I definitely gravitate towards her character in a similar way as I did to Tommy. I just find her more interesting than everybody else. She's this really cool, dedicated athlete who just really freaking loves being a Power Ranger. Like, she just really loves being in the silly spandex suit and kicking monster butt. It's fantastic. She's just so much fun whenever she's on screen. She's played by Tessa Rao, and she is in canon an overachieving athlete trying to live up to the standards of her father, who expects the world from her. And learning to ease off on that a little bit is going to be a big part of her arc. You can already tell. And yet they do something really great in episode 5, where she has an athletics thing that she's been wanting to compete in, right? And because there are more people on the team, they tell her to go ahead and compete. They don't want her to stop living her life to be a ranger. I think that's a really cool detail. They did that in Kira Major, one of the more recent Sentais, too, for an episode. And I thought it was really great there, and I thought it was really great they did here, too. But like, I just love her character a lot. I took to her immediately the first second she was on screen, and she's actually directly tied to the specific reason why I decided to make this video today, and that is the overall plot of episode 5. In episode 5, Izzy is training to compete in a big run, a big race. Can't remember what they called it in the actual show, and I don't know sports, so I can't deduce what it would have been called. As this big race, it's like a big race through like the woods and stuff. One of those really long ones where you have to pace yourself and you actually have to understand how your body works. The kind of thing I could never do. And this in and of itself isn't anything remarkable. A lot of shows have a big race plot where one or more of the characters intends to compete in a thing and try to win it, obviously. But what is impressive about this one to me is the introduction of Izzy's cousin, a character named Lily, a medal-winning Special Olympian, played by actual New Zealand Special Olympics athlete Sarah Dalton. Simon Bennett, the director of this episode, went out of his way to cast an actual Special Olympian for this role, an actual special needs person for this role. And it doesn't seem like this was a stunt casting, like we found out about it ahead of time, we knew this character was going to be in this episode, but it doesn't feel like this was some kind of stunt casting or anything. It really just feels like they were trying to be inclusive and representative. And I love that. But the best thing about the inclusion of this character is the writing around her. No special attention is drawn to the fact that she's a special needs character. She's treated like any other character in the show. In fact, the only explicit reference to the fact that she's a special needs character is when they tell us that she's a Special Olympian, and she is specifically here to train Izzy for the big race. She participates directly in Izzy's specific character plot of the episode, where they have a misunderstanding and then have to come back together by the end, and even delivers the episode's message to us. She's absolutely fantastic. She's a great and memorable character, and also a fantastic example of representation. Like, I'm all for representation that calls out the fact that it's representation, that are loud and in your face about the fact that some people just aren't represented in media. But I think the better representation is the kind that just treats all people equally like people. And this episode does that so phenomenally well. I liked this show before episode 5, but after episode 5, I absolutely adore it. And I think a lot of you guys will too. If you can overlook the fact that Power Rangers has this silly connotation in pop culture these days and just give the show a chance, I think you'll get a lot out of it. It airs on Nickelodeon every Saturday morning, with certain exceptions for special programming that supersedes it. Or if you don't want to watch it on Nickelodeon itself, I can give you a link to where you can find it online. Just give the show a chance. Do it for me. Like, I'm legit sitting here trying to think of what else I can say to try to sell this show to you guys. I know. A lot of Power Rangers shows have a little helper who hangs out at their base and helps them out. It's usually like a robot or something. This show's helper character is a cybernetic talking dinosaur. And I love her. She's probably my favorite character in the show, aside from Izzy. So yeah, if you needed even more incentive to watch the show, there it is, cybernetic dinosaur. Anyway, this has been my 2 cents on Power Rangers Dino Fury. As per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of the show if you've seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. I would even straight up love to hear some of you guys' headcanons, if you want to share them. Like if you have any about the show or just Power Rangers in general, I'd love to hear them. And while you're down there, of course, please like the video, share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. I'm trying to get myself out there, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could help. You can check out my social medias. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.